Hello and welcome to 20-Minute Marketing. Thanks for listening and I hope you're having a great day. We're now on episode 30 of the show, which I can't quite believe, to be honest, and I've been really excited for this episode for a while now, so I'm going to get started right away and introduce our guest. And today's guest is Timothy Armoo, who is the CEO of Fanbytes. So hey Timothy, how's it going?
Pretty good, Liam. How are you?
That's great to hear, and yeah, I'm doing good too, thanks. Could you spend a couple of minutes telling us about yourself and Fanbytes?
Cool. So at Fanbytes, what we do is we help the world's biggest brands, world's coolest brands to reach younger audiences on social media. So everyone from Samsung to Kickers to even the government, all the way to the Department of Education. We help them to reach younger audiences on social media. By younger, we're talking between the ages of like 13 to 25. And we do that through three central pillars. Firstly, we run like performance-led influencer campaigns for these brands across Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. And then also we own and operate and we manage some of the biggest social channels and social talent on Snapchat and TikTok. So we help brands to create stories on there. And then the third thing, which is like super exciting, is we've also just built like an e-commerce arm where we are able to create e-commerce brands, and we either work with brands to co-create them, or we just own and operate a number of really successful brands, from lip gloss to a whole range of different things. Started it 3 years ago. I started it in university at 22, and here we are, 40 people later, and we're doing well, rocking.
Thanks for the introduction. It's clear that there are some really big brands there that you mentioned that you've worked with. And I spent a bit of time on your website in preparation for the recording. And there are lots of great case studies on there that highlight how some of those brands are using channels such as TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, AR, etc. to connect with younger audiences. Just a few that I liked real quick. So there was one on there about using gamification with Charlie XCX and Warner Music, a Boxing Day campaign with Boohoo, and how you worked with Kevin Gates, who is a popular US rapper, and raised his profile in the UK by using AR. So if you are new to Fanbytes, or perhaps looking for some inspiration on how to use those platforms that I've just mentioned, then reading those case studies might be an interesting place to start. And of course, we'll be discussing them in more detail during the episode too. Some of the topics we'll be chatting about include how you can connect with Gen Z, using TikTok and the role of influencers, and a few other things as well along the way. I'm going to open the episode with a few generic questions that focus on Gen Z, and then we'll see where things go from there. Before we started this recording, I just had a quick look at the listening statistics for our show, and I found that around 70% of our listeners are actually over the age of 28. So I think we have a great opportunity here for Timothy to share some insights with those of us that might feel slightly disconnected with the Gen Z audience. So yeah, first of all, putting marketing to one side just for one moment, what are some of the characteristics of Gen Z that listeners should be aware of?
So I think the biggest one is probably often when you go to conferences and events and people talk about, like Gen Z are these different breed, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, well, no, they're not. The reason why we are different is primarily because we now have social media, which we can use to amplify what we think. And that, I think, is just primarily the main difference. A lot of people talk about things like self-expression and self-identity. And I'm like, well, not really, because everyone wants to express themselves. Like the 40-year-old guy, just because he's 40 doesn't now mean he just wants to live a silenced life. It's actually more that because the tools we've grown up with are more native to us, we basically can very easily get our message across. So if you just think about Gen Z as pretty much like similar generations, the main caveat being that we have the ability to amplify anything 100-fold. That, I think, is like a much better framework to look at it, and thinking about them as like these, completely different beings and aliens to what people sometimes say at these like conferences and stuff.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. And I think when you look at the younger half of millennials, most of us are using those platforms like Snapchat and Instagram too. So the crossover is probably much greater than people assume. And you talked about incorrectly labeling Gen Z. Is there a way that brands can improve their relationship with younger consumers then?
100%. I think the first one is just like being where they are, right? There are still, you'd be surprised how many people still believe that what you can do is, this is something that's said a lot, but what you can do is take a repurposed piece of content and just put it on there and go, yeah, cool, this works. So the first point is just about, if you're creating content for a platform, create content for that platform. The second thing is, a lot of people go about how, like Gen Z need to be coddled, and they need to, they're not aware if there's an ad or something like that. So a good example is like with the whole influencer marketing world. A lot of people are like, like people need ad disclosures because they don't know if it's an ad or not. And, like Gen Z don't know, etc. And I'm like, this is just complete rubbish, because people know when they're being advertised to. If anything, the 17-year-old who's grown up with this as essentially their form of advertising fully understands. So I think one massive mindset change is this whole idea that they are, a bunch of snowflakes who need constant holding. And brands who actually can go into the conversation as, no, we understand that you guys, like, even though maybe you're 17, 18, 16, we understand that you, because of social media, have seen the world a lot more than people even, double your age. We're going to like treat you guys as adults. And the brands who do that well, there are so many brands who do that well. Like, they stand for something and they empower, and they then get Gen Zers involved in the conversation, are much, much, much more successful than those who go, let's come down to, let's theoretically come down to your level.
I think if you run an experiment and you had 118-year-olds and 150-year-olds, and you had a list of posts and some of them were paid ads and some of them weren't, and they had to spot which ones were the paid ad, then I think I'd put my money on the 18-year-olds. I know it's just one of several platforms that Gen Z uses, but I have a few questions about TikTok now. I read an article on The Guardian a few weeks ago that stated 1 in 3 Brits have TikTok downloaded on their phone now, so I think everyone probably knows about the platform by now, but I still think there's a knowledge gap when it comes to businesses using it for lead gen and brand awareness compared to, say, Instagram, which I see a lot of local businesses actively using and promoting their services on. What are the benefits of using TikTok to brands?
Well, I think there's several. I think one of them is the fact that on TikTok, like TikTok as a platform prioritizes videos over specific profiles. So because of that, the variable to success is not actually how much can you pay. The variable to success is how creative can you develop content. And the moment that you think that, you realize like it's a crazy opportunity. Because I've seen people with just, 5,000 followers go completely viral on TikTok because they've just created a really solid piece of content. So for me, that's the approach that I think works for brands, where they think creative first rather than let's just pay a bunch of people to post that stuff. So that there, I think, is one of the big advantages. Creativity means you can get millions of views on your content.
And of course, brands can run ads on there as well now.
TikTok is very much in its infancy in terms of like ad maturity and stuff, but we run ads on the platform, and the cost per clicks and the CPMs are also very low.
Is your focus on video ads, or are you running text ads on TikTok as well?
Our strategy is pretty simple. Like, you run video, you take influencer creatives and run them as video. Just works exceptionally well.
And I'll be honest, I don't use TikTok that frequently. I have it downloaded. Sometimes I go on it when I need to pass a bit of time or when I'm bored or something. But when I was browsing a few weeks back, I saw an ad from Lewis Capaldi on the platform, and he was promoting a live stream. I think the phrase that he used was, "Become the king of TikTok with Lewis." Do you think live streaming is something that we'll start to see more and more on there?
If anybody wants to go check out my LinkedIn, I actually wrote a piece about how the head of Disney streaming has now gone to become the CEO of TikTok. And what I think that means is that it is going to be now, like, live is going to be now incredibly, incredibly big right now. And streaming and people being able to monetize quite a bit from that. Already we know influencers who are making, couple $100 a week just by live streaming. Yeah, I think it's one of those things where if you want to see how TikTok is going to be in the future. Look at how Douyin is in China, because they're owned by the same company, but but it's almost like they use China as a test bed for things, as a precursor.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I am intrigued to see how businesses use the platform and start to use it to grow and develop and sort of incorporate creativity into their brand. I do have one final question on TikTok specifically. Speaking from a personal note, I work for a company that sells a service and we're not quite sure how we could use TikTok to our benefit. So how can B2B and SaaS brands use TikTok when they don't always have a physical product to showcase on there?
I think if you're a B2B company and your product is relatively complex or expensive, I don't think it makes sense for you to go on TikTok. What makes sense for you to do is if you are the CEO of the company or you are someone who works in the company and you want to add a bit of like personality to your company for a recruitment perspective, then that makes perfect sense. But if your product is, selling to B2B marketers, that's probably not going to work for you.
Yeah, I like that answer because you mentioned the positive impact that having a TikTok account could have on an overall brand without necessarily focusing on how it impacts conversions. So let's add Instagram, Snapchat, AR, YouTube, etc. all back into the mix. Say I am a company that is just starting out on those channels and I have limited reach. Would you advise me to work on growing organically, or should I consider using influencers to help raise my profile?
So I think you already need an influencer specialist if they can contribute something that you can't. Most people, I think, should do it on their own if what they're essentially trying to do is get a number of influencers to talk about their product, and you're pretty much going to be using those same influencers over and over again. If, however, the thing is that you need not only skill, but you also need much better data and insights into how actually this whole process works, into how to optimize for the best click-throughs. For example, we built a bit of data which actually tells us what time people installed an app, what time people clicked, what time people did this. So therefore we can optimize on that. That there is where you add value. But if your thing is, well, I just want a bunch of people to talk about my product, then I don't think it makes sense for you to have an influencer company.
I find it really interesting that you mentioned that we could potentially see a decrease in influencer marketing companies. It sort of leads nicely into a thought that I had, because I remember the days when I was obsessed with Bebo, MySpace, and those platforms that aren't around anymore. And as well, over the years, we've gradually seen a change in demographic on Facebook to an older audience. So do you think social media platforms like TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, etc. have a shelf life, or will they be around for the foreseeable future?
I think it depends on who you're asking. For example, there is no better channel if you're like an app or a gaming company, or like a direct response brand where you have a low units value. There's probably no better platform than Snapchat, just purely from a conversion perspective. It's insane. I think it outperforms Instagram by like 2.7 to 1 in terms of like return on ad spend from an installs perspective. If you're a fashion brand, then obviously in fashion beauty, Instagram is the way to go on there. And then on TikTok, if you're entertainment, but increasingly if you're like a DTC brand, massive success on there as well. So I think that, like, to answer your question, it's not so much that do I think they're going to be the future. I think it depends on who you're asking, and it depends on like what source you're asking from. Social media right now is just the internet, right? And like social media is the internet and the internet is social media, right? So the question kind of assumes that there is a discrepancy and there is some difference between Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat and then like the rest of the internet. But I think we've now got to the stage when TikTok has 2 billion downloads, Instagram has like 1 billion users on it. Like this is just the current state of the internet. Like social media is the internet. So I don't think they're going away anytime soon. I think the purposes will change. So for example, Facebook right now is definitely not a social network at all, but it is pretty much the best advertising medium there is, like pretty much ever. I think pretty much better than anything. Maybe Google can come to it because it's more of like an intent-based thing, but like from how do I target this 37-year-old mom in Texas who is about to have a baby? It's like, right, Facebook can tell me this. So I think they will evolve, right? So like Facebook and Instagram essentially are now like advertising businesses. But I think if you're talking about like, do we see them die now? Like MySpace, Vivo, etc. They've just reached such critical mass, and they're so good for specific niches of people that there's just no way that they'll die, right?
I think you hit the nail on the head there. Those older platforms were great and they had their uses, but I don't think they had that advertising capacity and commercial setup that channels we use now do have. So moving away from speaking about different social platforms, I want to ask a few quick questions on Fanbytes now, if that's all right. So I mentioned a few case studies at the beginning of the episode, and I was wondering if you had a favourite campaign that you'd worked on and why.
So there's quite a few. Like I could talk about some of the like well-known ones, right? So we've done stuff with Cardi B and Bruno Mars, and we've done stuff with the government and all that stuff. But I think most of the ones that I like is when a brand has come to us and they've been relatively unknown, and then we've helped like blow them up. I think like those type of things I'm a big fan of. So there's a gaming app we worked with. They basically came to us. They were having, I think they had in all like 20,000 users or something like that. And within 6 months, we took them to 250,000 daily active users, not just like normal downloads users, but actually like daily active users. And to see basically the growth of a brand just under our guide, I think it's like really, really inspiring. That's much better than when you go, oh yeah, like we did this thing for McDonald's, we did this thing for Burger King. It's like, yeah, cool, but like that doesn't really move the needle, right?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that with us, and it's nice that you were able to include some statistics. I have one final question in this main section. So I've been really interested in the Fanbytes house that you launched, and you've had some great press from it from all over the world. So could you tell our listeners what that is, how it came about, and sort of the impact that it's had from a PR standpoint?
So yeah, the house was something we've been thinking about for a while. It's kind of weird, right? Because Corona is probably the best. Corona is probably the best and the worst time to do it. Best because you suddenly have a lot of people coming, like a lot of people watching your content. Worst because it's kind of like initially our whole idea was to do really cool stuff. Like for example, every 2 weeks get a new influencer to join the house and all that stuff. But actually, the content they've been creating by themselves is pretty good. So we started it off 3 months ago. We said, so the planning started about 5 months ago, and it was like, we want to create basically like a form of IP where we can get people to buy into it by bringing 6 of the biggest TikTokers under one roof and get them to create content. And the TikTokers have been great so far. Like they 6 of them, 16 million fans. We launched and we've been pretty much everywhere, whether it's Vice, BBC, Observer, Times, anywhere at all. It's just been an incredible experience. We're clocking about 50 million views on our content. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And fortunate enough, we've got like really cool brands wanting to be a part of the experience as well. So I'm pretty happy about it. Right, we have 17-year-old TikTokers, 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds, and they're all like really interesting stories, right? You have a gay couple, you have like an LGBT pair who used to be a couple, but now they're not a couple anymore, but they're now best friends, and you have these like viral pranksters, and you have this whole host of really interesting people who symbolize every single facet of what Gen Z are going through. And for me, that is like super interesting, and that's what I think we as a company are really looking forward to in terms of just like creating these different owned and operated media properties. So that's the story of the Buy House, and it's been good. Every single bit of press, etc., we've got is just further validation of it.
That's great to hear about the level of success that you've reached, and I'm sure there was a lot of hard work and planning that, of course, went on behind the scenes. So let's end our main chat here and move on to a few fun questions on Timothy's career to finish the episode. So it's time to close out the episode with a few fun questions. It'll be really interesting to hear your answers here, Timothy, because I'm pretty sure that you're the youngest CEO that we've had on the show, and I imagine that you'll hold that record for a while. So I always start with this question. Do you have any memorable or fun stories from when you first launched Fanbytes that you'd be able to share with us?
Yeah, so one of them was pretty interesting. One of them was when we signed on a pretty large client, and it was during the time that I had my exams. So this was my third year, and I had an exam, which I remember this very clear. The exam was a 3-hour exam. It was from 10 till 1 p.m. And my meeting was, I think it was like at like 2:30 or something like that. And I went to Warwick University. There was a Virgin train from Coventry Station, and I think that train was at like something ridiculous, like 1:18 or something like that. So I had to basically go from there to Houston, but I had this exam, which was I think like my second to last exam. So I was kind of working through it, and there was a particular problem because I did computer science. There was a particular problem on there, which I was like, man, I could solve this, and I know the way to solve it, but it would just take a lot of time. And I was like, man, I need to get out of the exams a bit earlier because basically, I don't know if people know this, but you can't leave an exam with like 10 minutes left or something like that. It's a weird rule. Like you can't leave an exam in the first 10 minutes and then in the last 10 minutes or something. So what I did was I was like, okay, this is probably not going to work. So I wrote a note in the exam paper. I was like, even thinking about it now, it's funny because I knew the guy marking it. He and I were pretty good friends, and he knew actually quite a bit about like Fanbytes and stuff. So I wrote a note. I wrote, dear Mr. Russell, I know how to solve this problem, but I've also got to catch a train to close XYZ brand. Can I send you my worked out example as a screenshot over email? And then I just missed that question, and then I just like finished it up, got the train, came to London, sorted it out, and then I sent him a picture. I then sent him a picture not only of the worked out question, but also of an email from the client saying they're gonna go ahead with Fanbyte. And I sent it to him, and I was like, yeah, sorry. Like basically it was like, in a couple of days, you're gonna get my paper and you're gonna see that on question 6A, I basically dropped this note. Here's my worked out thing. Here is it all. And here is also the reason that I left. And he emailed back actually like 2-3 days afterwards, just with this message about how it's like the funniest thing that he's got, etc. And he actually said, yeah, cool, that's fine, because I think that he knew that I would get the question right anyway. It was just some circumstances, and he's been very supportive of me actually. So that was definitely one which was like, that was so random.
Yeah, that story definitely didn't disappoint. Thanks for sharing it with us. It's nice to hear that there are university tutors that are understanding the bigger picture and supporting our careers too. I know we're pressed for time a little bit since that was a long but definitely worthy answer. So let's finish with one final question, and that is, do you have any tips for any young entrepreneurs that are considering launching their own business?
Just realize that most of what you're trying to do has been done by someone else. So you just need to go and figure out how they've done it and just do that. The idea of a unique idea, I think that's massively overrated. The whole thing, like, you must have a really unique idea. So for example, when we started thinking about, this whole like owning IP and turning into more of a media owner, what I did was very simple. I basically went online and I looked at companies like the Barstool Sports. I don't know if your audience has heard about them, but Barstool. I basically went there and I just read everything about them. I listened to every podcast the CEO was on. I listened to all that stuff to just understand a bit more about how they thought about building IP and building talent-led business. And I basically have been copying the playbook ever since. But I think that's one thing I'd say, like, people talk about, work hard and all that stuff. And I'm like, well, that's a given. If you're going to choose this path, you're just going to have to do that. But if I was to be super practical, I'd go realize that most of what you're trying to do has been done by someone else before. Go and seek out, go and learn how they do it, and then just copy it and just make it a tad bit better, and you're done.
Slightly off topic, but I love that you mentioned Barstool there. I've been following them for probably around 6 years now, and they are just growing and growing in size. And if anyone wants to check out how to nail your social media content strategy, then yeah, check them out. Although I do have to warn that the content might not be right for everyone. One of many things that they do, which has been working really well for them, is that their president, who is called Dave Portnoy, what he does is he goes around the US and he reviews pizzas. So he'll go to a pizza shop, order a pizza, and then he'll take one bite. He uses the slogan, "One bite, everyone knows the rules," and then he'll give it a score out of 10. And for whatever reason, it's super successful. He has millions of people tuning into his live streams to sort of see the reviews. And I'm not quite sure why, but people just enjoy watching him take a bite out of pizza and give it a score.
I actually just listened to a podcast of him on the, I don't know if you've seen recently the fiasco that's been happening with Call Her Daddy. They gave these guys a shot. They actually gave them their own show. The show is doing quite well. And then they just decided that they went rogue, basically. And he came on the podcast and was just like, come on, guys, this is just absolutely ridiculous. But he gave some insights into like the intricacies of the whole world. I was like, wow, it's super interesting.
Yeah, that's also another interesting talking point. The Call Her Daddy fiasco has been a big topic over the last few weeks, and it resulted in the show being the #1 podcast on the US charts. So it definitely makes for interesting reading from a marketing standpoint, and how much of that was planned or how much of it was legitimate. Let's wrap the episode up right here. Thanks for being an awesome guest, Timothy, and sharing some great insights with us.
No worries. Thank you.
No problem. And I'll see everyone soon with an exciting new episode that is going to include 2 guests on the show at the same time for the first time.